without note, we start from as single and free living cells. There are some organisms that exist as free living cells. That is, they don't need the cooperation of other cells to exist. And examples are some of our protozoas, which is amoeba, our paramecium, our euglena. Now, these organisms can carry their function without the cooperation of other organisms, of other cells around them. Each cell is an individual organism that does not need the cooperation of any other organism to survive. We'll move on to the next one, which is as a colony. Now, there are some cells that aggregate together and form a colony. Now, as colony, they are interdependent upon each other because they share what is known as cytoplasmic material. And the cytoplasm is the living part of a cell. So imagine a cell sharing its living parts with another cell, which also shares it with another cell, which also shares it with another cell. So it forms a community of cells like that depend on each other and cannot be separated from each other. You cannot tell one cell from another cell because they are all just meshed together. So that is what is known as a colony. An example of a colony is Volvox. You will see the diagram of Volvox in the notes below. Another example of a colony is the sponge and also the Pandorina. Now, these organisms exist as a colony and they depend on communication between one another to survive. Now, we'll move to the third one, which is as filaments. Now, filaments are cells that are joined to each other at their edges, forms a long cord-like structure. And these ones they are independent of each other. They are just joined to each other, but each one has its individual life. A good example is the Spirogyra. The Spirogyra is functional, can carry out all its functions on its own, but they are just joined by the cell membrane to another Spirogyra cell and to another Spirogyra cell like that, and it forms a long mass of cells joined together at the edges, and that is why we call them filaments. Then finally, we have cells as part of a living organism. Now, like we have said before, cells come together to form tissue. Tissues come together to form organs. Organs relate with each other to form a system, and all these systems come together to form a living organism. So cell can actually be part of a living organism. Different cells come together and interact as performing different functions in these particular organisms. So that's just that for forms in which living cell exists. So we're going to move to a question immediately. And that question states, differentiate between filamentous and colonial cells. Now that is a typical WAEC theory question. Now the first thing you note about a filamentous cell differentiated from a colonial cell is that it is connected with, the cells are connected together by intercellular wall. Between the cell wall of one and the cell wall of another, they have this wall that joins them together. While in the colony, they don't have such structure. Rather, they are joined together by cytoplasmic materials. Now, secondly, filamentous cells are physiologically independent, meaning that they don't need the cooperation of another cell to perform their function. Whereas the colony, you can't tell them apart from each other. They depend on each other to function. And finally, like I said before, they can be differentiated. You can tell that, oh, this is one cell of Spirogyra, this is another cell of Spirogyra, this is another cell of Spirogyra. Meanwhile, in a colony, you can't tell them from each other. So that is a typical question that will be asked as regards to this very short topic. See you next time.